Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and today I wanted to do an expansion ranking which has been requested in the past. This is not a purchase guide. I stand by my original video, which is focused purely on teaching for that. This is more of a retrospective. If, for some reason, you could buy the game piecemeal regardless of order, and you wanted to own everything, which would I consider to be most important? Not that you should do this, but you could technically buy a handful of expansions and just play like that. So in the spirit of that, how do I rank the expansions? For this list, I emphasize the expansion overall. If it has factions I love, that will be a significant factor. If it has factions I don't love, that will also be a significant factor, but not as much. If an expansion has no significant factions, that's a big detractor, as it means it's potentially missable. I do need to remind people that I generally believe everything is worth owning, as I am a big fan of the game, though no one has infinite money, and there are some things that are harder to justify than others. So I try to focus on value more than anything. In light of that, at the bottom of the list at number 16 is the AEG store expansion, which doesn't really exist, but refers to anything that isn't a traditional distribution method. This includes Titans, Penguins, Sheep, and even the bigger, geekier box. Because if the factions didn't come with it, they would be sold in the store, and it creates the same problem. These things just aren't efficient piecemeal, and shipping can be expensive. For the Titans, it's nice to have the plastic physical ones, but you could play with print-and-play supplies. For a faction like Penguins, $10 plus shipping is a lot, and it prorates to $40 for an expansion that would MSRP at $25. I enjoy the Penguins, but it's a sizable price for one faction, even if I am a completionist. My advice would be to wait for the Goblins promo and buy everything all at once to minimize your shipping costs. Next on the list is the obligatory Cthulhu expansion at 15. I like Innsmouth, but these factions just don't get as much play in my group or many others, and there were a lot of quality problems in this expansion. Innsmouth stretched the line between sometimes unplayable and something overpowered, depending on Dagon, and Minions of Cthulhu can be the same way. Madness also adds additional complexity that hasn't been revisited and is very niche in terms of synergy. Until they revisit the mechanic, it remains on the bottom of my current list. Number 14 is Oops, You Did It Again. This expansion contains the Ancient Egyptians, a faction I really love, but many struggle with and overlook. But aside from them, they contain 3 factions that do not excite me at all, especially the Vikings, who I find excruciating at times. This expansion also contains heavy dueling, which messes with the pace of the game and is a bit like organized chaos. My love for Ancient Egyptians cannot really outweigh how unlikely I am to play each of these other 3, but Oops has its fans for sure. Stephen McArg from Monday's video has said it's his favorite expansion, but for me, it's very passable. Number 13 is That 70s expansion. Perhaps it is the theme, but none of these factions are particularly noteworthy at this time. Kung Fu Fighters have always been kind of average for me. I like Disco and Truckers despite their theme, although neither is that high on my list. I used to really like Vigilantes, but have soured on them considerably, and they do not excite me as much as they used to. This is the first expansion without a faction I really like, one that would score high on my list, and thus it has a fairly low ceiling, which is why it is so low on the list. Number 12 is Cease and Desist. While this expansion does not contain any standout factions for me, I do enjoy the Astronauts quite a bit, and the Star Roamers can be extremely solid. Changerbots are a faction that I think I can grow to like more over time, while Ignobles present a challenge faction that offer a unique playstyle that can pair with lesser used factions for a new experience. While much of this expansion's attention is drawn to its theme because of parity, I am looking strictly on value, and this one begins inching towards the middle. Number 11 is What Were We Thinking? This is a very odd expansion because it contains the Rockstars, my favorite faction, and one that always makes me feel competitive. It also contains the Explorers, which I really like even though they never make my top 10. Their combination of movement and surprise plays really appeals to me. But it also contains Grannies and Teddy Bears, 2 of my least favorite factions. But because of the math that I used for creating this list, it sits at 11, close to the middle, carried by the strength of the better 2 factions. Number 10 is Culture Shock. For an expansion that contains 5 factions at the same MSRP, that is certainly a boost to value. It also contains Anansi Tales, a faction I adore. The issue is that everyone else is just okay at best. There are many others who love culture shock, but I am not one of them. Russian fairy tales feel like a support counter-faction to me. Grimm requires specific partners. Ancient Incas are probably my second favorite in the group, but they don't feel all that unique, and their partners tend to be of the same variety. Polynesian Voyagers grate my nerves unless played a very specific way, and one of the things that stood out to me about this 5-faction expansion is that no internal pairings really make all that much sense unless you use Anansi, largely because their cards don't make much sense to anyone else. But 5 factions for the price of 4 does bring up its position. Number 9 is the core set. For the set that started it all, it is in the middle of the pack. For having 8 factions, none of them are particularly my favorite, and the core set is a mix of underpowered and overpowered. The core set created a few bad precedents and contains the most factions that are likely to be banned in the form of aliens, robots, and zombies. I do love a good dinosaur combination, as well as a good pirates combination, and the core set will always remain special, but when compared against the entirety of the set, I have it in the middle. Number 8 is big in Japan, which surprised me that it would be this high. For the expansion that created Titans, which I often find to be a problematic concept, the majority of factions are extremely solid and create a lot of intrigue. I really enjoy the kaiju and the inversion of play by focusing almost exclusively on actions. The itty critters have stormed their way into the top 10 largely on the nature of Critter Champion getting better and better. The Magical Girls are a swarm faction with a lot of ways you can play them, as well as a great recursion partner. Mega Troopers probably feel in last place, but they are still solid, and possess Lightning Rescue, which is always a card of intrigue. Number 7 is Munchkin. Yes, Munchkin. The expansion that many write off entirely or keep separate is actually in my top half, and that's a surprise to me as well. This is despite 3 factions that rely entirely on monsters and treasures. This ranking is because of the strength of the factions that just seem to get better and better. Halflings, Clerics, and Elves are all fantastic fun, and 2 of those are in my top 10. You can play mages and orcs to avoid monsters, although orcs can be really hard to synergize with. But for those 2, there are teams where they combine to uniquely form extremely fun pairings. If you get Marvel, you will want to pair it with Munchkin. There was a week where I played almost every faction with Halflings because of how well they fit into it. It's funny how 2 expansions players claim to want to keep separately actually combine so well together. Number 6 is Pretty Pretty. I consider Pretty Pretty to be the start of the Silver Age, with a lot of iconic factions delivered. Mythic horses can definitely give robots a run for their money, and may even be more complete and consistent. Kitty cats can be incredibly annoying, and are a go-to faction for players who love antagonism. You have the Princess model, which struggled early, but has gotten better over time as they got more natural partners. The fairies are okay, but have a few standout cards and got a Titan that provided a nice boost to them, making them more playable. For an early expansion, it contains few corrective Titans, only 1, and that is an indication of strength. Number 5 is Monster Smash. Ignoring the fact that this expansion contains vampires, Giant Ants, Werewolves, and Mad Scientists are all extremely fun. I think Mad Scientists are among the more underrated factions in the game, as they have a nice collection of extra power and extra plays. Werewolves with their Titan have entered the problematic conversation, but I campaigned for Werewolves long before their Titan as a unique play from the top down faction. The Giant Ants with their specials have some of the most satisfying plays you can pull off. What works against Monster is the fact that 3 out of 4 factions got a Titan, but overall, I find most of these factions very appealing. Number 4 is Awesome Level 9000, the expansion that included Talents, the best innovation in the game. A natural extension of the design space, Talents revolutionized Phase 2 and really emphasized the idea of engines. It contains everything you would want in an expansion. Antagonism with the Bear Cavalry, a heavy hitter with Steampunks, a support faction with Killer Plants, and a challenge faction with Ghosts. Even though Killer Plants have internal synergy issues and the Cream Puff Man can be insane, it doesn't take away from the general utility of this expansion, and all of them remain relevant today. Number 3 is International Incident. All 4 factions are extremely solid and drastically differ in their playstyle. The Luchadors engage their opponent and care about plays from turn to turn, rather than the big drop. The Mounties use opponent power against them and go right at you. The Musketeers focus on big, crazy plays, chaining cards together and providing unique opportunities for factions that grant power in unconventional ways. The Sumos mix card draw, power, and movement to be a dangerous foe at all times, and I think that this modern expansion was the best in a while given the remaining candidates. Number 2 is Science Fiction Double Feature. It has 2 Titans for 2 very weak factions, but ignoring that, you have 2 standout factions in Cyborg Apes and Shapeshifters, both with top 5 favorite potential. That upside is too great to ignore, and there are ways to make time travelers and spies work if you are intentional about their partner. Drastically different playstyles among all the factions made it fresh at the time, and I still love my 2 picks today, so this faction remains a great buy even 10 expansions later. And that leaves It's Your Fault as my number 1 expansion. 5 expansions for the price of 4, with the Tornado Surprise being such a great moment of discovery. These factions are all great and produce no Titans, so they are monitored standard for strength. The playstyles vary drastically like Science Fiction Double Feature, but each faction has a high floor, and that makes them consistently competitive. The superheroes changed how king minions are viewed by providing instant access. Sharks show that destruction can have a point. Mythic Greeks get scary very quickly and took some interesting design choices with how they structured the faction. Dragons provided a new direction for antagonism and area control, while tornadoes became the pure realization of movement. It was just excellence across the board, modernized much of the rulebook, and remains my favorite to this day. So that's how I rank all the current expansions. Just a final reminder that I love all the content and I think it's all worth owning, but it's still fun to look back. This marks the end of Phase 2 for Crank It Up, and I'm looking forward to sharing the start of Phase 3 on Monday, so be sure to check it out. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.